Hello, everybody. My name is Don Taylor, and I'm part of the PLP Pathways group, and I'd like to welcome you to our fifth webinar of the 2019-2020 season. Today, we're going to be talking about flexible pathways and community partnerships. And before we go any further, I'd like to thank the Middle Grades Collaborative and the Tarrant Institute for Innovative Education for helping to support this work. If my co-contributors could introduce themselves, that would be excellent, and then we'll get going.
Sure. I'm Meg O'Donnell. I teach 7-8 Humanities at Shelburne Community School.
Hi, I'm Kevin Hunt. I teach on Swift House and a 5-8 team at Williston Central School.
All right, and again, my name is Don Taylor, and I teach at Main Street Middle School in Montpelier. I teach language arts and social studies. So today we're going to be talking about flexible pathways and community partnerships. And I just wanted to start with the definition of flexible pathways according to the Agency of Education of Vermont. Flexible pathways are any combination of high quality expanded learning opportunities, including academic and experiential components, which build and assess attainment of identified proficiencies and lead to secondary school completion, civic engagement, and post-secondary readiness. These include, but are not limited to, blended and virtual learning, community-based learning, work-based learning, and career and technical education. One of the things as middle-level educators that we wanted to, I think, begin talking about is how maybe we're preparing our students for flexible pathways and what that can look like in our classrooms. We've talked about this in the past, but flexible pathways can often be, it can be difficult to set up for kids in the middle school classroom. So what we try and do is develop experiences that will help them get ready for the opportunities that they're going to have at the high school level. In addition to talking about flexible pathways, we also want to talk about developing community partnerships to enhance those flexible pathway experiences and to develop the relationships in the community that are most effective. And then lastly, we'll talk also about micro-credentialing and how to set up a system of micro-credentials in the classroom so that students can begin to understand what that is going to look like. The last piece that is woven through all of this is this idea of equity. When students move to, when they move to the high school, how can we be sure that all students will have the opportunity to engage in the flexible learning pathways that we know are so important and that can launch them successfully into post-secondary or perhaps college and technical education? So this idea of equity and making sure that all students have these opportunities is really important. Those are the things that we're going to talk about today. Kevin is going to start us off with a discussion about what flexible pathways look like in his school, and we'll go around and talk about those opportunities. But we have been joined by another contributor, and if she can introduce herself, that would be excellent. Susan, unmute.
All right, thought that I had. Hi. Hi. Thanks for the invite. I got an invite from Kevin, and then I saw you folks on Twitter, and I thought maybe I was just going to be watching versus being part of this, but
No.
Nice. So I'm Susan Hatsey. I work for the Tarrant Institute for Innovative Education, and I've been super interested in digital badging and micro-credentials for a bit now, in part because of the way that we can articulate proficiencies as markers of growth. So I'm really excited to hear what's happening today.
Awesome. So why don't we start with Kevin and Meg, and maybe just talk about your understanding as a middle-level educator of flexible pathways, and maybe what that looks like in your classroom and how you're preparing kids to take advantage of those flexible pathways as they move both through your program and onto secondary educational opportunities.
Yeah, so with me, a big thing that you were just discussing was, providing students with different experiences, and that definitely comes into some of the different units that we do with our students and how we develop community partners. One thing in particular, I think the way that we design our team and work with our students through our 5-8 model that we have with developing relationships with the families and getting kids like right off the bat, getting involved with, being leaders in something like our camp out group, that those give students experiences that I feel like get into the self-direction and citizenship transferable skill areas that then we can kind of start building there and move forward with those pieces. So like right out of the gate at the beginning of the school year, we provide students with these experiences that we're teaching these soft skills that I think will carry them through not only high school, but post-secondary and the career. The other piece, I know that we've all been talking a little bit about some different ways that we've been working in sustainability through our curriculum. And I think that's been such a key ingredient for us this year in terms of how are we developing community partners and allowing students to both have some choice and flexibility around what they're passionate about and what kind of things that they want to study as it relates to them and they know affects them, and working with them to have this experience with different organizations and community partners throughout our local and larger statewide communities that, again, we're able to bring people in to connect with them. We're able to get our students out in the communities to do some service-based learning projects. And again, it keeps coming back to one thing that I think is really valuable in middle school is developing these soft skills with these middle school students and getting them to recognize, how are they self-directed? How are they contributing to the, positively to their overall environment, both inside the school building and outside of it? How are they being just contributing members of society and seeing themselves as contributing members as a 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old is really powerful, especially once they begin to advocate for themselves and advocate for others around them. So that's my I guess big idea with flexible pathways.
Okay, Meg.
Yeah. So I appreciate what you were sharing, Kev, because every time you say something, it triggers in me what I'm like, oh yeah, good, that is flexible pathways. So being on a new team this year has been a little interesting in terms of just trying to, the things that we used to do in the past related to community and building, having kids become like leaders of the play that we had, or coordinating our camping trip at the end of the year. We don't necessarily have those systems in place the same way, but a lot of times when we did that in the past, it was often an awareness for kids like, oh, this is what it means to coordinate with a group, or, those soft and hard transferable skills that we're practicing. This year we've tried to do something more community-based, which has been to reach out to our local, to Shelburne, to understand a little bit more about what makes our town unique, and using the community as like this sort of platform. So what are the buildings? What's the history of our community? Why is it organized the way that it is? And we're still in the process of hopefully it's been stretched out longer than I think we wanted, but the ultimate goal is to have kids see themselves in their community in some way, whether that's through a project or a legacy or a task that gets them to back out to the community and sharing that learning to a authentic audience. We're also, Wendy and my teammate and I, we co-teach humanities, and we're enrolled in the Cultivating Pathways for Sustainability with Lindsay as a course, Lindsay Hallman, who's also a member of the PLP Pathways. And I'm excited to see what might come from that, because I think as educators, we want to tap into the resources so that we can then transfer that to kids, right? So the more that we understand about what we can do with our kids based on these resources, that we might, we don't always have time as educators to do that legwork. And so by taking a class, I think we're hoping that we can access some of the resources that are available to us through this course. So that's some of it. And I guess something that I keep coming back to around this idea of flexible pathways is really helping students to see that there are multiple ways at achieving a common target. So it may not be like it may not be like this big, huge community-based project, but it is just like in my classroom, helping kids see that there are different ways that you can achieve a common target, that, and we might have different levels of that achievement. But there's, I don't know if I'm saying this right, but I guess what I'm just trying to reinforce for them that we come at these tasks from different approaches. We have different ways of demonstrating our understanding. And as long as I'm providing voice and choice in that process, and helping them see that this is not that the learning doesn't end because the task ends, that we're going to continue to practice the skill. We're going to revisit these experiences and hope that that you will see yourself as learning is on a continuum, and not sort of, oh, this work is done and now I've handed it in and I'm all done with it, you know. I'm not sure that.
No, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. And as we're having this discussion, what often comes up is, as we're having this discussion on the webinar, people are asking, well, you know, what are some key facets of this, or some key structures that you might want to have? And when both Kevin and Meg, when you were talking, what I keep going back to is evidence. What's the evidence of learning? And one of the things about flexible pathways is that we need to coach children and students to be able to recognize what is evidence of proficiency. How do I know that this is acceptable, that it meets proficiency, that it is appropriate for this credit or this class or this task? So this idea of evidence of learning is really important. And so if a kid is going out into the community, what are we expecting them to bring back as evidence of their learning? And so that this evidence idea is really important. And I think a place to keep that evidence is also really important, which is why the PLP is such a critical part of this. And so, you know, for teachers out there, if one of the things that I kind of talk about all the time is citizenship is a very abstract concept. And in particular, if you want all kids to have an experience with citizenship, you probably need to bring it into your school, because if you expect all kids to go out there and get it, you're going to have a wide variety. It's inequitable, because some kids are very well supported by families, by resources. Other kids are not. So is this experience equitable? Does the student understand the evidence that they need to demonstrate that they've achieved proficiency? And the students need to have a place where they can archive and curate that evidence to demonstrate how they're growing over time, meeting that proficiency. So again, Susan, I know we're not talking about micro-credentials just yet, but micro-credentials are sort of on that same pathway. Like, here I am, I'm going out maybe onto the internet or to an online course, and I need to demonstrate my proficiency. And once I've passed something, what certificate or badge or evidence demonstrates that I have met those priorities and those skills? So, you know, just to recap, I think Kevin and Meg, you know, really give us a good insight into what's happening in their classroom, but we also need to know what evidence is, and we need to construct that understanding with kids, and we need to have a place to keep that evidence that they can access. And I know that Kevin talks about this all the time. How are they going to reflect on it? How are students going to reflect on it to say, hey, this is what I did well, this is what a challenge for me? And then once they're in that reflective process, the next step is, what goals can I set to improve my performance over time? And so those are some of the key pieces, at least what I think about when I'm thinking about, you know, these flexible pathways. And as I mentioned in the opening, a flexible pathway can be an online course. It can be work-based learning. It can be doing an internship in the community. It can be a mentor-mentee relationship, all these different opportunities. And with those opportunities, we're growing our classroom experiences, but we're also making sure, hopefully, that kids are able to demonstrate the proficiency along the critical skills that we know are so important. Um,
Can I
anyway, that's
just
just,
add?
yeah, Susan, go ahead.
I really appreciated hearing both flexible pathways and the personal learning plans, the PLPs, and how that all intersects with Act 77. And then the proficiency angle to this feels to me as if, in multiple ways, we have to give opportunities for kids to be able to show evidence of transferable skills. And so without those flexible pathways that we're talking about that are age appropriate for middle level students, they can still do really well within my course, but where are they showing transfer? And they can show transfer with like really authentic, amazing learning experiences through flexible pathways. So it feels integrated in a way. And I know I'm hearing Meg, it's hard to do without a community surrounding you and lots of support to be able to do it. But again, how do we give kids authentic opportunities to show evidence of learning without creating these flexible pathways for them? So it feels so necessary.
And just to add to that too, Susan, I kind of go back, what skills do students need to, number one, collect evidence? What skills do they need to what do we have to pre-teach them or help them construct so that they understand, hey, what's a proficiency? What's an example? What's a model of how this has happened before? What's the expectation? And so we have to teach them some of these skills so that they can then embark on that flexible pathway opportunity. So for example, if you have a kid doing online learning, you have to teach them problem solving skills, digital citizenship skills. And so there's, it can be, you just have to think carefully about how you get, and as Susan mentioned, age appropriate opportunities for kids so that they can be successful. But I think more importantly, that they can understand the ties between what they're doing and what the opportunities that are going to be available to them at the high school. And I just want to really, this one idea about equity is if all kids don't have the opportunity to practice those skills so that they're ready for the opportunities at the high school level, the kids who will have access to those opportunities will be the same kids who've always had them. The kids who have the resources and know who to ask and where to go. And we need to spread those opportunities out across the student body so that everybody has those chances. Anyway, anybody have anything else to add about that?
I would just say, sorry. Oh, go ahead, Meg.
No, you go first.
Just going back, and Meg, you were talking a little bit about this, but linking back to the proficiencies too. I do appreciate how our district has set up our learning scales and learning targets. And I know we've gone back and forth about this because some of them in terms of grain size feel really big, some feel really small. But what's nice is they're all integrated within the transferable skill areas. So all of our learning skills are kind of embedded under one of the 5 transferable skill areas. And then we kind of weave in some of these habits around the content. So it's not just specific to the content. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I feel like it allows teachers this opportunity to teach to more of the skill level than it is just kind of, reporting out on what they know about content. It provides us an opportunity to have these flexible pathways and say, well, here's, if my target is I can use multiple credible pieces of evidence to support my claim, there's a ton of ways you can do that. And it's not just by reading or writing or, sitting at a desk. So I've appreciated that in regards of it's given us an opportunity to accurately report out on some of these flexible pathways that we're taking with our students.
Kev, it's funny because I was just going to say the same thing about the fact that one way, and Don, you sort of mentioned this too, is this idea of reflection on where am I at, demonstrating these skills. So we just started over the last couple of weeks to ask students to reflect on the transferable skills in their Friday emails. And so part of our prep for that is having kids, on a Tuesday, if the Friday, it's Friday email. So on Tuesday, we'll say, all right, let's put up the transferable skill for creative and practical problem solving. And we would we'll name, we'll describe the 4 bullets that are underneath that. And we'll say, so where have you demonstrated the skill this week? Like, where's some place that you've already been doing that? And kids will say, well, we did this in math, and then we did this in science, we did this in humanities. And then someone else is like, we were doing, I had to deal with this with my family or whatever, like I did this particular one, or my trimester goal is all about setting goals, gathering evidence, reflecting on the goal. So the more opportunities we can help them see that by transferable, we mean across your world. It is academic and it is in school, but it's also outside of school. It is, yes, a lot of times some people might think that a specific skill is practiced maybe more in a particular content area, but it's not absent in other content areas, so that we're trying to break down those silos for kids to see where the learning is happening throughout their day, throughout their weeks, wherever it might be.
Hey, Meg, I just want to, I think I completely agree with that, but I also want to go back to something Kevin said, and maybe it's just because of where I am right now in the process, but our school, again, is refining learning targets and priority standards, right, in our PLC work. And Kevin, what you said just was like a brain flash, because we had a discussion today about the language of our learning targets and the language of our priority standards. And I'm a big advocate of simplifying that language, but even more than that, with the point that you just made, it is so critical that our learning scales or proficiencies or learning targets or our priority standards can be applied across the experiences that Meg was just explaining. Because if our priority standards and our learning targets are solely based on the classroom experience, we are going to cut off the engagement and motivation for so many students, right? And so when we're thinking, administrators, if any of you are watching or will be watching, think about that. Your learning targets and your priority standards need to be applicable not only in your language arts class, not only in your humanities class, but at your job, at your presentation, at your anything that you're doing outside of school, right? And it sounds like your district has done a good job with that. But for districts who are revisiting their priority standards or who are deciding what our PLC and what our need to knows are, can students take those priority standards and demonstrate learning outside of a traditional classroom arena? And I just think that, Kevin, when you started talking about that, that hit me like a ton of bricks, because that's something that should be part of our protocol when we're writing standards for kids, right? And so, Susan, do you have any opinion about that? I don't know if you, go ahead.
No, it's good. Good. No, I think I'm just going to go back to the idea that every, as we think about micro-credentialing as an overlay to the system that we've just been talking about, it's really just a different kind of language to articulate clearly, Don, what you're just saying. What does it mean for anybody who's part of this ecosystem to understand clearly the target of whatever's happening? So a family member, a mentor, a student, because we've been explicit about those indicators, should be able to have a common understanding and a vocabulary to talk about this. So again, I feel less that it's important that it's a digital badge as much as it is a clear indicator of what everyone needs to do to be able to achieve whatever we've set out to help learners attain.
And I think you're absolutely right, but that language also has to be accessible to all parties, right? So, because if it's a mishmash of English, of educational ease, right, you're going to have people who don't understand it, who are confused, and who won't be able to act. That's part of equity, right? To me, is that everybody understands the language about what we're trying to do. And so, anyway, that was just a very interesting insight, Kevin, and I appreciate that. I want to move on to talk about maybe community partnerships a little bit, and then we can combine this discussion of flexible pathways and community partnerships with this idea of micro-credentialing. And so we'll start with Meg, and just if you could talk about maybe some community partnerships, then Kevin, and then I can talk about some of the things that are happening in our classroom with our partners. Meg?
Yeah, so I mentioned it a little bit earlier. We have some ways that we're working with community partners, but in terms of reaching out to community members we're bringing, you know, we brought all our kids in small groups around the town to, we went to the shipyard, we went to the local stores to get a historic context of, sorry. Thank you, Penny. Apologies. So one of the things, so we, in October, went the kids all out on a walk for town, and in the next couple of weeks, we're inviting some town historians to come into Shelburne to follow up on that learning that happened in October, so that we could, again, go back to what's the legacy or the project or the task that we want to show as a result of this learning about our town's identity. How am I reflected in our town's identity, that kind of a thing. Beyond that, we haven't established yet firm partnerships, but I think, I'm hopeful that the course that, the professional development that my teammate and I are participating in, Wendy and I are participating in, will hopefully yield more tangible community partners. That's my hope.
Kevin?
Yep. So one key thing I'll say about the community partnerships is up until last year, when we kind of redesigned our curriculum to include sustainability, the only places where I think we're really getting some actual traction with community partnerships is with our 8th graders. They do 8th grade challenges, which are, we model what CBU does with their grad challenges. And as part of that, it's a year-long research project, and our 8th graders have to find a mentor, create a research project and topic that they're going to do throughout the school year. They work with their mentor, then they develop some sort of community service by the end that connects to it. And that was, again, that was only for 8th graders, and that was a big piece with that. With the 5-7s that we have, we never really had an opportunity to really get them connected or involved. We had little pockets here and there, but it wasn't a regular connection. Since we've revamped our curriculum to include sustainability and really focusing in on the global goals, now we have, we modeled after the green team, what you do, Don. We have, 16 committees, and one of the first things they do is say, okay, here's the global goal that I'm interested in. Here's some issues around it. And we have a community panel come in to talk about local organizations that are addressing these things. We send emails out to parents and other local members just to see what experiences they have. And all of a sudden, we just get flooded with all these potential options for community partners. And then these committees start emailing, start making phone calls, and start developing these relationships. And it becomes more of a service-based learning project where they're working in tandem with these community partners on a common goal. And it's not just we're going to provide service, but we're kind of learning from them, they're learning from us, and it's something that is regularly happening now. We have, 4 or 5 of our committees now that they're having people come into Swift House or that we're taking off campus. For instance, we have a group that they're all about connecting senior citizens, so they just walk across the street. We have this great senior community, and once a week they go over there and they do things with the seniors, and it's just been so empowering to them to develop those relationships and partner. But again, it was like kind of makes me want to hit myself in the head, like, well, what were we doing before this in terms of providing opportunities within the school day for these kids to develop community partners, and I'm happy that we're doing it now because it's invaluable for us.
That's awesome. And I think what I would like to focus on is that I've done the same thing. We've run a program called the Green Team in our classroom for about 8 years now. And I had a committee model. And then what we did, like Kevin has done, is we've shifted our committees to environmental, sustainable efforts. And the most important thing is that we do it in the school so that all kids can experience it. It's not predicated on transportation. It's not predicated on your parents or your resources. It happens in the school. And as you were talking, I just kind of created a list of our community partnerships. And I just want to read some of them. And I also want people out there to know that sustainability is going to be one of the biggest issues, and climate change are going to be, in my opinion, some of the biggest issues facing our children and for the rest of their lives, right? And so what we've done is we've focused on the sustainability, and we've partnered with Orca Media, downtown Montpelier. We do a news show with them. We've also partnered with the Teens Reaching Youth program, and the Teens Reaching Youth program is available to all schools across Vermont, I believe. That's from the UVM, and the Teens Reaching Youth, they teach sustainable lessons to younger kids. We've also partnered with the Central Vermont Solid Waste Management District, and in fact, one of their employees comes over every Monday to our green team and talks to us and has helped us win some grants for school-related actions. Friends of the Winooski River, the Vermont River Conservancy. The Crayola Color Cycle is a new one for us, where you can take used markers and you can send it back to Crayola. I know that Williston Central School does that. Call to Recycle for batteries. The Vermont Energy Education Program, which is also available to all Vermont educators. And then we've also teamed with the Climate Emergency Initiative, which is happening in Montpelier. And so we've had adults from each of those organizations come into our classroom and present to us or work with our students. And they've been able to help us identify some initiatives that we can do in schools with those partners. And I think that's critical for about 8 million different ways, but a few that I'd like to focus on are: number one, it helps kids understand what it means to have good, positive adult-student relationships, how they're expected to behave, and the deliverables, like whether it's an email, whether it's a presentation, whether it's being on time. They start to learn some of the skills that are going to be critical in a self-directed, flexible pathways environment. They also need to understand that they're being held accountable, as Susan mentioned, to an authentic audience. So when they go out and present, it's not just to the same old teacher, but it's to a whole different audience that they need to demonstrate that they're capable and proficient in the skills that we know are important in the real world. And the other thing is they need to develop evidence, as we've talked about before, that can demonstrate these experiences over time so that they can reflect on them, so that perhaps they can use those experiences for interest, not only in high school in terms of education, but also in terms of employment. And maybe I'm really interested in some of these sustainability efforts. Maybe I want to explore other programs in high school and then follow that up with a dual enrollment or an early college class that can then lead to employment. And so having the PLP structure where you can collect this evidence, because as Kevin knows, if you have 16 committees, you don't have 16 heads that can be in all those committees at once, right? So you have to trust students, you have to have great relationships, you have to hold them accountable for getting the evidence themselves, and you have to hold them accountable for being able to present that evidence to you in a way that demonstrates their proficiency. So, I've been fortunate with building these community partnerships, and when I look for community partnerships, I look for it not just for one event or for one unit, but for years. Because and the thing that I found too, and I'm sure Kevin has found this, is that once you hook into some of these community partnerships, they'll recommend you to another place. And one of the things I think that Susan will talk a little bit about when we hit micro-credentialing here is that a lot of these organizations, like the Vermont Energy Education Program, they're designing curriculum for kids. They're designing, learning experiences for kids based on the transferable skills, and they want you to bring kids to them to experience what the education that they're providing. So I think that's a really key piece is, that you have relationships that are positive, that you bring adults into the building who can set a good example, that you hook into the educational and employment opportunities afforded by those organizations, and that you then continue to collect evidence and put that in an archive in some place, which is that personal learning plan. And so I think the community partnerships piece is critical. And this also, I think, now leads to this micro-credentialing, right? Because some of these organizations are offering like certifications or badges. And, in some cases, kids have to earn a badge or get certified before they can actually engage in the learning, right? And so, Susan, do you want to talk about in a nutshell, your vision of micro-credentialing and how it fits into this flexible pathway structure. And then once you do that, Kevin and Meg, maybe I can certainly talk about it. I have a little bit of a micro-credentialing program going, but let's talk about maybe some of those opportunities. Susan?
Great. I'll be really brief, but I want to just circle back to there are sort of larger supports in the state for helping teachers who are really crazy busy to make these connections to community partners. And so I just want to do a shout out to the Vermont Community Learning Network, which is grant funded to do some research on students earning transferable skills over a 7-year period is the hope through community connections. And so the first year of the grant, and it's with the Creative Engagement Lab and Paul Gamble and that crew, who's like gathered a whole bunch of folks together. They're working with 3 districts right now, but they want this to go to scale where they create a panel of teachers, students, and community partners so that community mapping and that asset mapping gets done, and then it brings that kind of supports back into the school so teachers can actually do this. So there are things that are happening in the Vermont that I think because we value this work, I think is great. Just briefly, I worked in the past with some expanded learning providers, VEEP, 4-H, Young Writers Project, What's the Story, who are really eager to work with students, and they recognize that they're teaching both content and skills wherever they happen to be doing the work, and so have tried to articulate what the indicators of earning a transferable skill could look like, and what the evidence, like you've been saying, Dawn, could actually look like to be uploaded and then to be able to have a digital badge to put on a PLP. I guess the thing that is the takeaway is that they're eager not only to work with students, but to show the evidence of like this really powerful work that can happen when kids are doing projects with them. And they want both the kids to have that internal motivation to do it, and then to have the recognition through our school's architecture to value that learning. And schools need that. We need to see examples and indicators of what transferable skills look like. So I think that's what I have to share.
So Susan, I guess there's some folks out there who might even be like, what does a micro-credentialing, what does that program even look like? And one of the things that I could do is I could try and share a website with you if people want to see that. Do you think that's appropriate to share something?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me just see if I can do this. Hopefully, let me see.
And Don, while you're queuing that up, I think I'll just sometimes it's important to think about what's happening in the larger context. So everybody knows IBM, and they've actually given over 1 million badges now around some skill sets that are open for people to be able to access, because they want to actually show on their LinkedIn page or on their even their email signature that they have the skills that might be hireable for them. So this is happening in a much broader context, but I think it's the same analogous kind of, we're really clear about indicators, the things that we value, and what we want you to do to show evidence of that.
Well, Don's getting it up. Can I just ask a dumb question or just a question? But is it sometimes that it's content that's like if I was doing a geography unit, it was like, can you name 50 states? Can you name the capital? Is it that, or can it be that level of sort of a discrete knowledge? Or are there some guidances or ideals around what is it that we want kids to be playing with or experiencing in a micro-credentialing opportunity? I guess that's a question I'm wondering.
Well, Susan, so apparently it's not going to let me show the screen, and I'm not sure why. Let me just see here if I can. Maybe I can. Actually, hold on a second. Is everybody still there?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm just going to show you, and Meg, you just asked a really good question about whether it's discrete skills or not. So hopefully this is the right web page. It's taking an awful lot of time to load. But I have 2 programs that are working. So I'm going to go to I'm going to go to the view. Okay. All right, so this is our website here. And if you notice at the top, I have a badging. If you can nod your head, can you guys,
Yep.
you see this? Okay, so this is a badging program, and it's not totally built out, but I have, so for example, we were working on capitalization, right? And I did some capitalization exercises in class, and then I just set up this web page. And I set up the web page, and I have a video here about capitalization. I have a second video, and then I have these capitalization quizzes that I found online, which are free to use. And then what happens is the kids go through these quizzes, and then if they demonstrate proficiency, they take this quiz, this capitalization micro badge. And if they pass that quiz, I use something called Google Certify 'em, and Google Certify 'em will automatically send them a certificate demonstrating that they've passed that capitalization quiz. And that certificate, you can change the standards for completion. So you can have, they have to get 80% correct to reach proficiency, 90% to reach proficiency. So this is just one way, and you can see that I'm sort of building out some grammar exercises, and then there's actually a personal finance. Now, one of the things about micro-credentialing that needs to be clear is that students receive initial instruction from me always, and then they can go and independently work their way through these badges. The other thing that needs to be pretty clear is that students can take these quizzes as many times as possible in order to reach proficiency. What I'm looking for is that they're proficient, not that they can, you know, that they have to pass or fail, but that they can demonstrate proficiency. And once they get that certificate, they then can post that onto their PLP, right? So here's a second, so that's one badging program or micro-credentialing program that I use. Another one is for more independent work. And as Kevin was talking about sustainability, we also obviously do this green team, and committees are sort of all over the place, right? So a committee might be finished in 20 minutes one day, another committee might take an hour. So the question then is, what do you do to make sure that everybody's kind of moving forward in the learning progression? And so what I've done is I've created an academy. It's called the Green Team Academy. And I'm challenging kids to try and become a Green Team Academy graduate. So the first part of the Green Team Academy is called climate change. And if you, I'm scrolling down here, and you can see there's 4 badges that they can achieve. One is educate, act. This third one is connect and communicate. So we have these principles of educate. You have to understand the issue. You have to learn and be knowledgeable. Number 2, you have to act on that knowledge. Number 3, you have to connect with other people who are also working on those initiatives. And finally, you have to communicate. The act, the connect, and the communicate all have exercises that are based on, you know, priority standards and learning targets. Okay, so is this clear to people? Like, nod your head if this is clear. Okay. And so then let me just take you to the climate change page. So this is the page that I've set up for the Green Team Academy. And again, you have the badges on the top, and it's fairly simple. The first part is the educate. I show them the badge that they're trying to earn. They need to watch some videos. They need to go through the learning materials, which were from the NASA website. People can, you know, choose whatever materials they want. I have a formative assessment here. We scroll down. There's a couple additional learning materials that they have to understand. And then they have a second formative assessment. There are some articles about food and sustainability. And finally, they have their certification exam. Once if they take and pass that exam, they get their educate badge that you saw at the top, right? That's part 1. And then the climate change act, they have to take action to earn this badge. Option 1 is that they have to they have to identify 2 to 3 strategies to reduce the impact on the environment. They have to write a properly formatted email to me, or they can go to this website and write a short story. And again, we attach rubrics of proficiency to these so that students have to demonstrate that they're proficient. If they are, and I sort of assess this with them, then they get the badge. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you'll see that here are the criteria for the connect. And then here is the criteria for the communicate, where they have different products that they can produce to demonstrate their learning. So at the end of the day, what I've done here is I've just created a system where kids independently can work their way through the badging system. They take those badges, they put them onto their PLP, and they can show me that they're reaching proficiency in those.
I think
That's all
one thing
I got.
I think that's amazing, and I think one thing that is so clear about that is you've been so clear about what needs to happen, the depth of knowledge of moving through, that it's not just digitized, that it's working with you in the community, but the clarity of the transparency is why the proficiency and flexible pathways and the PLP system all works together. So when people talk about how proficiency based learning sometimes obfuscates like what people are learning, what really is happening, and I think any micro-credential or badging system, is that people as teachers have to clearly articulate what learners need to do. And you've just done that for everybody.
Well, I think it really helped solve a problem, and the problem was classroom management. So what do you do when you have a bunch of kids who have finished their jobs, and how do you make it so that you can provide an extension activity that is available to all students, and then that all students can, try and demonstrate their proficiency in what I consider to be critical, not only academic skills, but understanding about their world. And it's also, as you know, it's available in the classroom. Kevin or Meg? Yeah, Meg, go ahead.
Well, I just had a question, Don. The questions of equity are coming in. So for kids that are, do all kids experience this badging system? It sounds like your green team meets once a week and everyone's part of a committee or some part of it, right? Are there kids that are just trying to stay above, like I feel like I have some kids who are just trying to keep their heads above water in just the regular elements of what's being asked of them in the classroom, so they don't necessarily have access to or opportunity to take those, explore more of an exploration or deeper dive into something like that. So I'm wondering about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer probably is that not all kids are going to be Green Team Academy graduates, but all kids are going to experience that committee work. And one thing I need to mention too is a lot of our Green Team work is dialed directly into our PLP. We have a citizenship page on our PLP, which is directly where the Green Team work goes. And Kevin and I, before the recording, were talking about what kind of, your PLP template. We consciously constructed our PLPs to have that citizenship page so that the learning on the Green Team can go right there. And so all kids experience the committee work. All kids can define what it means to be a citizen. All kids can use their committee experience. But the Green Team Academy is for kids who are, want to do extra. And I do ask that all kids at least attempt each portion of them. Now that's an issue though, is what happens to a kid who isn't getting the badges, who's sitting next to another student who, it's just like the Boy Scout. I have my intro badge and I'm sitting next to a kid who's working on their Eagle Scout. Like, right. How does that work? And what do you do with that to create a more equitable learning environment?
Well, doesn't it go back to that idea of flexible pathways, right? Like if we're being really transparent with kids about what flexible pathways means, then it would mean that not all of us are going to have the same experience, right? Like not everyone's going to have the same thing or achieve the same achievements in every single single thing. I think in some ways that's helpful, right? To expose them to this idea that, you know, kids are going to be drawn to different experiences. You might have some kids that love the green team badging process, and other kids that love, you know, another type of badging system, and they're going to excel at that one. That they're going to devote their efforts maybe to the things that they're drawn to.
And you know, the other piece is that I try and assess kids on things that they're all doing, right? So I can say to kids, hey, everybody, you're going to write a reflection that I'm going to assess based on your writing skills and writing process on your green team experience. Whether or not you achieve the badges is not the most important thing. The important thing is that you were in the green team and that you can reflect on that experience, and that maybe you have evidence of what you've achieved, right? So you might be doing a small job on a small committee, but if you can reflect on that and connect that to some of our bigger ideas, I'm going to set up an assessment to demonstrate that, so you feel good about what you're doing, and that you can link that to this overall concept of evidence and citizenship, and that you understand what it's going to take to engage in the flexible pathways opportunities at the high school level. I mean, to me, that's the important thing. It's kind of I wouldn't say it's harmless, but it's kind of a low risk situation for kids that you can try this. And then when you get to the high school, you know, hey, is there a way that I can get credit for this by doing an online course, et cetera? And they'll at least be familiar with it. And not to overwhelm people, but just in the process of micro-credentialing, you have to know how to navigate a web page. You have to know how to follow instructions. You have to know how to read and reread and use your comprehension strategies. So there's a lot of teaching that can go into the micro-credentialing process too, that, as Susan mentioned before, is age appropriate and really helps kids with the experience of learning online, which I think is something that's going to be part of everyone's future. Kevin, did you have any comments on the micro-credentialing?
I mean, not too much to add. Just one thing I know, I was working with Susan earlier in the year on looking at micro-credentialing as a method for kind of enhancing your classroom climate and culture, and thinking about how can we be badging for some of these soft skills that kids are doing, and thinking more through an SEL lens. And really, and in the conversations I've had with Susan, some of my colleagues, you know, micro-credentialing is really, it's intentional communication or feedback about your growth and expectations. And you're constantly giving kids this opportunity to say, okay, here's our goal, or here's our expectation. I'm trying to meet that, and that badging or those points are giving just that regular feedback to them about where they're at in that journey. And one thing I know, Susan had a chance to chat with one of my colleagues on a different team, and his team has taken this, I think, to a different level with teaching, you know, social emotional learning. And what he keeps going back to is just how, from a teacher's teaching aspect, it's made his teaching way more just purposeful, intentional, and the kids are just, it's definitely changing the culture of their program and allowing them to kind of really focus in on some of these skills. I don't know, Susan, if you want to say anything about this. I know you had more of an in-depth conversation with him, but I think there's so many ways you can take micro-credentialing that's not just specific to, you know, I'm going to be practicing skills, because that's one thing I tried to do with my own class. It's hit or miss sometimes. I think it's just the way I set it up. And even when I was trying to do some of that SEL stuff with my core group, I noticed that, you know, I didn't get into it until about October. And it was hard, I think, to already be in routines and structures and try to fit this in with what was already in place. So moving forward, one of my big takeaways was I would like to start this kind of as just an expectation, as a classroom norm at the beginning of the school year, to see if we can get some more of that buy-in from kids and just have it be part of our culture. So I have been playing around with it. I haven't had a ton of success with it, but you know, we're all eager to keep moving forward with it.
Awesome. I think when you just mentioned this idea of intentionality, I think that's really important. And I think also, though, outside of school, I'm a coach. And as part of coaching, you have to complete these online modules and certificates. And I think as adults, we understand how that goes. And I think that it's a skill that kids are going to need. At the end of the day, they're going to need that moving forward. I really did like that definition of micro-credentialing that you had, that maybe you and Susan Croak created, and I'm wondering if we can't get a hold of that definition and put it somewhere, because I thought that was really good. We're at 4:25, and so I'd like to kind of bring it to a close. Once again, this was a great conversation. I appreciate Susan for joining us, and also for all the input. I do want to acknowledge a couple events that are happening, and then we'll kind of go around. I know there's a big family event that Meg can talk about coming up. The middle grades conference is happening this Saturday at the UVM Davis Center. Middle grades educators from across the state are going to meet and share their resources and practices and how things are going. I want to put a pump out there for the Middle Grades Institute, which is happening, I think, June 22nd to June 26th at Champlain College this year. Registration is open for that. And I think Meg, Kevin, and then we'll bring it to a close.
Super. On March 11th, Wednesday, March 11th, the Family Board is hosting their annual Beyond Bullying Conference. We're excited for this year. It's at Champlain College. It's when a group of, a teacher and a group of students come to really think about things that they want to impact their culture back at school. The keynote this year will be around watching the I Am From Here video and processing some of that. We're really pulling in again around the idea of equity back in our classrooms and creating those cultures that we seek all the time. So Wednesday, March 11th, I think it's like 8 to 3, and there'll be registration forms coming out through on our website, on the Family Board website, and through any emails, and then usually by the end, probably in the next couple of weeks. So be looking for it.
Okay, awesome. Kevin?
I think you hit all the big ones. Good to go.
All right, and then Susan, do you want to tell viewers different ways that they can reach you, or some of the organizations that you're working with? Just give a shout out to them. I know you just mentioned the Vermont Community Learning. Anything, other events or work that you're doing that you're looking to get out there?
I've been working with the VTLFF, Vermont Learning for the Future Network, for a number of years now. And we have been doing a deep dive into micro-credentials with this equity lens, and both you and Kevin have come and joined us in the summit to kind of share the work and wonder about what this means for equity. So I love that that's happening. I think there's a February, I'm gonna flub the date, but February 11th, I think, is their next summit. It's gonna be here in Montpelier. They're doing great work. Nationally, there's a conference coming up mid-February as well that is looking at digital credentials, and they've been creating this comprehensive learner record that actually wrests the ownership of student records and transcripts away from people who have the money, like supports for it, and are opening it up to interoperability and people being able to like own their own records. And so that's a fabulous kind of sort of national movement that is just this idea that it would be a transcript and a continuous record that honors outside of school learning is happening nationally. And so we're trying to pay attention to some of that too.
Awesome. And I just want to say, Susan, it's a real pleasure to have you on the webinar. Anytime you want to join and talk about some of your work, either with the Tarrant or the Vermont Learning Lab, we would definitely appreciate it. Thank you again to everybody and to the Middle Grades Collaborative for sponsoring this work, the Tarrant Institute for Innovative Education. We'll see some of you hopefully all of you, on Saturday at the Middle Grades Conference. And until then, be well, and thank you very much. Have a great evening, everybody.